Let's get corrupted. What is up, everybody? It's your boy Joe with Meteoric Serpents coming back at you for another episode of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. Guys, it's episode number 30. Every 10 feels like a new achievement. It always feels good to see that number keep trickling up. But we have a very fun episode in store tonight. We have on Rob Stone from High Plains Herpetoculture. Going to be a super great episode. Rob has a ton of knowledge. I know he was just on Flippin' Tin the other night, which is a fun coincidence because I know our viewers kind of overlap. But and we're definitely going to talk a little bit about herping. But yeah, it's going to be a good one. So, guys, as usual, I do have Meteoric Serpents t-shirts available. So if you are interested, make sure you send me a message. Someone did do that this week, and their shirt is on their way to them. So that's always awesome. Also, make sure you hit the like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. As always, I appreciate it. We're on the trek to 1,000 subscribers, and we're almost there. So if you're enjoying what's going on, make sure you hit the like button for Rob. Drop a comment, say what's up in the live chat. Throw questions in there because I always do that as well. And yeah. And guys, below you can see all my social media handles. It's really Meteoric Serpents on everything. Make sure you go follow me on Instagram. Check out Morph Market as well. I don't know if I've really discussed it on here, but I don't think I have. I did decide I was going to start parting away with some of my ball python collection, really to make room for some more colubrids and stuff. There's really one project on that species that I'm kind of passionate about. I feel like the most passionate about. So I'm going to keep working with that. But a lot of the ball pythons are going. So stay tuned to my Morph Market because there will be some stuff going on there if there's any, ball python people out there. Also, guys, if you haven't checked it out yet, make sure you go check us out on all podcasting platforms. You could check us out on Apple, Spotify, the whole jazz. You could listen on your way to work. I like YouTube because I like to see people's faces and stuff, and I think that makes the conversation more interesting. But if you're an audio person, go check it out on there. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, whatever. Also hit subscribe on YouTube because that always helps out. I appreciate that. Guys, also you should support USARK Florida. Those are the organizations that fight for our rights to keep our reptiles. So, join the fight. We have strength in numbers, and yeah, you should definitely do that. Also, if you're looking to diversify your reptiles diet, I just picked some up the other day. Actually, you should check out Blake's Exotic Feeders on Instagram. That's my local quail guy, hand-raised quail, super great. All my rat snakes love it. I say it every week. I think it's great. I do the quail, I do the mice. So super good to switch up the diet a little bit and get different prey items in there. And last but not least, as usual, the first link in the description below has the link to the Meteoric Serpents Patreon. If you want to show support, that way you could do that. Also some behind the scenes of what goes on here with me. You also get early access to what's going on with the show and the podcast. I always drop it in there. Something I've also incorporated, with only the couple Patreon members I have. I like what the Retic Lounge does. If you guys have ever checked that out, they let their Patreon members ask a question beforehand for the guests in case they're not there live, or because they only do pre-recorded episodes. So I think that's good. And I'd like to take a Patreon question a week. I think that would be really cool. Another little element to the show. I think that'll be great. Also, the second link in the description has Rob's Instagram. So go check that out. Go follow him before we get started. And there was one. Yes. I want to start doing something cool. I want to start doing Colubrid of the week. So guys, on every single Instagram post I've been doing for quite some time, I do hashtag Colubrid Corruption somewhere on there. In the caption or whatever. So every week, I want to find the best colubrid that's on there. That's not mine. So what you need to do, start posting your pictures and put hashtag Colubrid Corruption in the caption, and it'll be on there. And then once a week when we do the show, I'm going to pick out the best snake on the tag for the week that I find. do that. Let's have some fun. I want to see some cool animals, and I think that's a really fun idea. So we're going to see some cool stuff. And before we get started, let's just say what's up to the people in the chat. We got Adam from Ivory Colubrid Co. What's up, man? That's one of the Patreon members. What's up? Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We have Jason Keller. What's going on? We also got, man, Freddie, Morph Valley Reptiles. What's up, man? Appreciate you being here. All right, and without further ado, let's bring our guest on for tonight. We have Mr. Rob Stone. What's up?
What's going on, man? It's good to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. No worries.
All right. Yeah. Cool, man. So I know, and we're going to talk about like podcasting stuff too, because you're a part of the NPR network and everything. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners may overlap to some degree, but I know some of my people may not know who you are at all. So if you don't mind, can you kind of give a synopsis of how you got into reptiles and how that kind of led into where you are today with them?
Sure. So as a kid in Hungary, I kept turtles. When I lived in Southern California, when I was, first grade, kindergarten, first grade, a kid had come into school and talked about how he'd been on a hike and they saw what presumably was a California king snake as part of the hike. And I just thought that was totally fascinating. Around that same time, I would have been on a plane to Cleveland. And I swear, so this would be early to mid 90s, that there was a woman with a corn snake and a critter keeper that she brought on the plane. No one was even contexting it as an emotional support animal, but that she was like next to me or in the same row or whatever. Just thought it was totally fascinating. My old man did not care for snakes in the house. I have to give him a ton of credit. So going off the Cal King thing, when the kid had come in and done that, he was neither into hiking nor finding reptiles in the wild, but he did that next weekend take me out hiking we went on some, several hours long hike, and it presumably was a garter snake or something, but it did satisfy. I did see a snake. And so maybe that was awesome. Sort of the origination of that stuff. As I say, turtles in Hungary. And then I was kind of, I think 97 or so, I had gotten the mall pet store boa constrictor, and that was the beginning of the end, or the beginning of the beginning, or however you want to frame it.
Yeah.
And got, from that point, as I joked about on Flippin' 10, the associated guide to help me there was the Audubon Field Guide to the reptiles and amphibians in North America, which theoretically, like maybe Sigma was in there, with a handful. I don't know what that field guide description was supposed to do. It had a bunch of mites, and that didn't go. It was not a successful initial venture, which is a little surprising on a neonate boa, but nevertheless, it kickstarted things. And a lot of the thing, what I was going to say is that it did start me, maybe having gotten the wrong book in the first place, made me big into getting the appropriate literature from that point. So I still have books and magazines. Subscribe to Reptiles Magazine, the Reptiles Annual, all sorts of books. And, it was the early days of the internet. So I remember a lot of Eric Burke is famous for having printed out the internet, and all this stuff. And I remember having seen a lot of those things. So I was kind of online on King Snake from 98 forward. I had Prodigy from 94 forward. So it was very, kind of coming up with me. And so I did have a ton of exposure, learned a ton that way. I remember auctions being a thing for the first time in 99, online auctions, 99, 2000, that sort of thing with that first iteration. So all that was kind of, maybe I was right in the sweet spot for hitting me in the right way. And by, 2001, 2002, I had in the teens to dozens of reptiles, and that sort of started it, went off to college, and in doing so, it hooked up with my buddy then at the Denver Zoo, Tom Weaver. We joined our collections, and man, it was off and rolling, working with hundreds of different species. And at this point, basically my, with a few exceptions, notably Rhino rat snakes that I've had now since 2002 was when I first bought them. I worked at Pro Exotics in 2000, starting in 2001. So I worked with them there and then bought their group in the fall of 2002. I've had them ever since, with, I think, last year being the first year that I didn't produce them between now and then. So that's been kind of the one constant throughout that time.
Yeah.
And but yeah, worked with a whole bunch of stuff. There have been times I've, usually, at least, especially the old me would go hard and heavy, so that I had, I don't know, 50 Leonis, 50 Alterna, 30 Rosie, but everything was in anything that's super variable like that. It was just, you have a whole bunch of it. I love the locality Alterna stuff. Most of that's from Brian Box and all that. And ultimately I've changed to have a mindset of wanting to keep less better. And I'm trying to do that by setting up naturalistic vivariums. Maybe we'll go bioactive or not, but really the naturalistic angle has been to, try and only include those items that would be found in habitat in that specific area that are found there now, that you can really tie to it. So, and then also I keep Jamaican and Puerto Rican boas that were things that when I first got into it, those initial reptiles magazines, I remember in '98, there's a Puerto Rican boa article in like the October issue, something like that. And it says, well, you won't be able to have these, right? Because they're not available for sale and all this stuff. And I think we get imprinted with a lot of that stuff if you take it the right way. And maybe a reason a lot of people like ball pythons now is because that was all the content they were seeing, and it's like, wow, the colubrids exist and all this different stuff, whereas my approach was I had the entire universe, and the ball python thing, it had started, there was albinos and pieds, but, my initial exposure to all that stuff was even preceding to spiders. We knew that, Kevin would say, oh, I want the ghost ones, the ones that look like they pulled them out of the freezer, but he hadn't improved it out, when I'm starting and that sort of stuff. So maybe just time scales and things work a little bit differently. But, now the stuff that's the coolest to me is the stuff that seemed inaccessible or super cool when I first started. The rhinos fit into that. They were new. They were first collected for captivity that we know of in 94, 95, so those, when Pro Exotics had got that group from Germany, and then the Russian editions and all of that, that would be 97. And then included in that would be the animals that I bought from them when I bought the group. So
awesome.
Like those are, I think that really does matter. What seems cool when you first start, heck, it still seems cool 25, 30 years later if you come all the way around.
Yeah, for sure. And I did my homework and listened back to your first episode with CCR. That was like a couple years ago, or like 2.5 years ago now. And I listened to it back then, but if I'm not mistaken, Pro Exotics was responsible for bringing in quite a few Asian species, or at least making them kind of commercially available in the US.
Yeah, I mean, so they're right up the road. Previously, they were in Boulder, right next door, functionally to Cameron. And so that was the origination point, right? So they would get stuff on a weekly or a biweekly probably basis, and we're talking blood pythons and monitors and these sorts of things, and all of that went through a whole scale change, right? So, but they grew up as a business next to Cameron and being closely tied to them and trying to really, their advantage being close and having that long-standing relationship was they could go hand pick stuff and then sell that as kind of a upscale choice animal, as opposed to just getting, well, you get what you get. I mean, shoot, the picture thing is entirely different now that we're carrying around, things that can instantly send a photo anywhere. It wasn't like that in the late 90s, early 2000s. Just getting a picture, don't think I had a digital camera until 2003 or 2004, something like that. So you wouldn't have that capacity. I wasn't necessarily doing the whole, printed 3x5s in the mail. That was on its way out by the time that I was starting. But that was sort of the starting point of their relationship. And then given that, then they would kind of pick up the cool stuff. Hey, Cameron pitch them, hey, this is the new thing. Let's introduce this to the market. And that happened with rhinos. It happened with coxeye. Less so Vianti, which had existed for a long time, kind of beforehand. Let's see, certainly the Laticinctus. And so those would be things that would be coming from Klaus Schultz or from the Tula Exotarium, the museum/zoo in Russia. Then Pulchra in 2008, 2009, which is funny to me because that's the thing we see now. That was the last to the party. Those babies were all of them invariably were gnarly little snakes, man. It's relatively rare to have a snake that'll bite the hand that's holding it. It's not with enough experience, right? That's a little bit unusual, and those immediately stuck out as gnarly little snakes. But it is funny to me. I mean, those things, I think they were like $3,500, $4,000, maybe in a pair or a trio, or pair or reverse trio. We can talk about that later with Asian rat snakes and
Okay.
how you wind up often getting reverse trios and that sort of stuff. But nevertheless, I mean, those were very expensive. Those were the least available. And now here we are. It seems like, save from Matt Most and people that have bought from him, well, I probably wouldn't buy something from someone. Maybe I buy on site, depending, if they had it a clear line to the wild. But other than that, I think a lot of that stuff is unfortunately been mixed together. And, so yeah, I know a lot about those. I've produced a lot of those, but
yeah, we're gonna talk about porfs for sure after the rhinos. But one comment I want to make: my Volanti are assholes as well. They are way worse to hold than the Coxeye. And then just speaking quickly to hybrids, like you had mentioned, I'm glad literally all my porfs are from Matt except one from Carol Huddleston, who I also trust.
The name's familiar.
Low belly. She's a big corn snake breeder, but I know she had Coxeye from Matt. But like of all people, like her I trust for sure. I didn't get it from some shady place, but yeah.
And as long as they don't look weird, then, because that's the thing. As someone who inadvertently produced some, or who was standing there to watch them hatch in a later iteration, they look funny. So if they look right and they only produce things that look right, I wouldn't worry about it on Coxeye in particular.
Yeah.
But if your Coxeye start throwing neck bands, don't love that.
Funny thing is, the one male I got from Matt has one.
Yeah, like one is okay.
But one is normal.
And super faded out, that happens. If you're talking, one just hatched out with 5 or 6.
Nope, for sure.
Yeah, so, and I wouldn't take them in that direction. And at the same time, I think it's mostly gone away. But so I did. I listened to your recent one when you talked to on Snakes and Stogies, when you were talking to Phil and Schmidt.
Oh yeah.
And you had made mention of it. It's a thing. It definitely goes back to the original Coxeye. That because there's an article in Soria, a German magazine from the late '90s, that basically talks about Coxeye in captivity, but has photos of the original wild animals that he got. And so the reduced neck pattern thing, as someone who's produced them. What I would say is, in my experience, that reduced neck pattern thing might be like a spider equivalent. You made mention of the spider thing and not wanting to produce those, so I did want to.
Really?
I was like, I should mention this. I saw neurological stuff out of those reduced pattern babies. That's not to say that it is necessarily, but
you're saying reduced back pattern, like when they have the reduced stripes.
Where it's like. It's like totally gone. It looks like he took a eraser to it from the first 2 or 3 inches or whatever. That does seem to be a dominant gene, and it seems to have a neurological component to them. Talking about there lots of riding up and backwards and stuff. So I probably wouldn't be selecting for that. Again, one of the original ones did have that look, and that trait definitely floated around, definitely was in the group, definitely was excited when I hatched my first one that was missing more of it than any I'd previously hatched. And but I think probably neural crest development, all that stuff, that those are probably not something we necessarily want to be selecting for.
That's super
in something that's so tight anyway. I mean, that was 4 or 5 animals to start.
Right.
We can't. Serious genes, go the other way, run the other way.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? It's interesting because I've never been able to decide if I like the reduced striping or not. Because I'm like, this is their natural look. Like, do I really want to take the stripe away? I'm like, the stripe is what gives it that allure to me. So I've never been extremely fond of the lack of stripe. I enjoy the nice full racing stripes down the back.
Look. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, at some point it becomes cool to hatch something different or whatever, but having worked with it for a handful of years, I wouldn't recommend it. And I don't know if they're even around anymore. I don't look very closely, but I haven't had one
definitely see them
come into my view. Do you? Okay.
I see them on Morph Market, but I don't think people know, and I've never heard what you said until you just said it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people talk, or if people even notice it or whatever, but certainly in the ones that I hatched, I noticed them. And it makes sense, any of those, just when we're talking about any pattern mutations, if they're messing with just going back to the jag and the spider thing and all of that, in terms of at least the old sort of language around it was associated with essentially that the genes as they're being distributed are going along in concert with other functionality, right? All these different cells as the animal is an embryo that's being developed, that the pattern is almost carrying those cells to the location that they need to go. So when you have disruptions to that, it can cause issues. I don't know that that's the current understanding. Dr. J is going to, Justin Julian is going to be upset with me or whatever, but potentially, certainly this was the understanding 5 years ago or whatever. But I would say that it didn't then, when I thought about it in that context, it didn't totally shock me that if we have a pattern disruption on the anterior part of the body, right behind the neck, that and you're seeing that weirdness, that there might be a correlation between those two things.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about that, but that's super interesting. All right, cool. All right, we'll stick on the porphs because it's a group of species or subspecies I definitely wanted to kind of highlight today. And I've only kept, again, cocci and volanti, but I was curious to ask, and I haven't had the pleasure of having Matt on yet. Now, when I received the volanti from him, they're the Guangxi province locale, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, I don't know. I say Guangxi. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. It might be that. It might be that. Yeah. So he had explained to me that he believes that there's a potential that they're actually a different subspecies and not
they're
quite
very different.
volant. Yeah, which is what I'm curious about, and I haven't seen enough volanti to concur with that statement because I'll see babies and I'm like, all right, that looks interesting, and then I have this male from him where his pattern's a little wonky compared to other ones I've seen. The female I have is growing nice. The female's a little bit bigger. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And especially because in reading the Klaus's book, I know that there used to be, it was like porphyracea, but like that doesn't exist anymore, or at least in the hobby it doesn't. But so that's always confused me a little bit, and probably because I just don't know the history of it.
Yeah, so as far as I know, porphyracea have never been in the hobby. So they're from India, is sort of the main place that they're from. And, or at least, so all these kind of, I think we're coming to understand, global connected internet and all these things, that we're getting more visibility into the patches. It used to be, our knowledge was super limited. I think it's still limited. But, Dr. Messenger's book did a really good job trying to highlight that. We had the phone call conversation where we had talked through it that Matt and Kevin had put together, and we were trying to talk through, I think maybe even before the book had come out, trying to make sense of some of that stuff. But so porphyracea, as far as I know, never, well, who knows if they were in Germany, but they never produced to then be babies that were shipped out.
Okay.
So I can't, as I say, I can't speak to whether any ever came in. I do know I never saw like offspring for sale. It was cocci. So Vianti were around just because they're in China, and China at that point in time was exporting live wild reptiles, right? So they would come in, those you would see, those I guess would be the first. And then the cocci from Thailand, Loei, was, Klaus had produced those, sent those over, and that was really the first one that took off. But there's the Vietnamese Vianti and the Chinese kind of strike different, what their background coloration, consistency of pattern, how much the blotches and stripes stay or fade. They kind of have different looks on them. And there's a whole host of, I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least a range, if not that they're entirely different
Interesting.
animals. So I definitely would keep those to those for sure.
Yeah, yes, 100%. Yeah, and I'm very curious to see how those grow up and develop, and then I'd like to compare them to the pictures in the couple books between the one from Dr. Messenger and from Klaus.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you say the Klaus book, is that the new one or the old one?
Sorry, the new one. I have the new one,
Mm.
and I got it
Okay.
recently, and I've been like very hyped about it because I skimmed through it a little bit, and it's just so awesome and all the different species in there. But yeah,
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, both books are cool in different ways, right? The second one is it's almost like articles on species as opposed to being an update on the old book, which is a more standard sort of everything we know at this point as of '94 or whatever it was. So,
right.
yeah, I mean, heck, you look at some of that stuff, and I think the Chipensis and the Perlacius at that point, all the photos in there of preserved specimens. So, I mean, those are animals that then um, I don't remember. So I'm not sure if people have Perlacius here, but certainly they have them in Germany and stuff, and
Okay.
captivity in China. At this point in Chipensis, right? That was another. Cameron brought those in, and those were very expensive. Same thing with the Davids and all this stuff. So yeah, it's been interesting, and definitely we've learned a lot.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But Bionti are
The
very different than Coxeye. There's no doubt about that. So they don't have,
yes.
Coxeye when they're funny because they're like one of those species that almost historically were there's a distortion in the market because you see more of them available than are actually being. It's kind of based on the number you see. You presume that more people are producing them than there are, and this was the thing with dwarf monitor. It's been the thing with a whole bunch of things, right? Where a person or several people are producing a lot of them, and then it'll be sold out to these 10 people who then maybe resell them. And it seems like, wow, everyone's having success. And that's actually
Okay.
sort of a market distortion where like it's actually a handful of champions that are then selling those, and they're all kind of, whether it's clear or not, they're being sold on.
Interesting.
So that if you get Coxeye dialed in, I mean, you can get 5 or 6 clutches from them in a year. They tend to have, 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs, something like that. Bionti, in my experience, were more like a clutch, maybe 2 very large eggs, 2 or 3. So just the fecundity could be very different. At the same time, if you don't have your Coxeye dialed in, then you might get nothing. So they're
Right.
definitely one of those things that a lot of them were being produced by a small number of people and then sort of being shifted around because as I say, if you got them dialed in, they'll do great. If you don't, it's not that they'll die, but you definitely won't be producing 35 or 40 of them from one female in a year. At a year,
Right.
like they'll start laying at a year old if you have them dialed in. Like literally, the
Yeah.
eggs are laid before they reach a calendar year. That's not
That's super
a
interesting because
suggestion.
yeah, and maybe because I've never, and I don't know because I feel like they're such small snakes. I've never fed them aggressively enough where I think I could get a year-old snake up to breeding size. Like even I have a hatchling male from 23, and like I mean he's small still. I mean I'm feeding him like a good pinky a week. It's putting a nice dent in him too. So I know I'm
Sure.
not I don't think I'm underfeeding per se, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I think that's totally fine, and I think that's a good approach to take. Especially now, there aren't that many of them going that I would trust and be super happy in, and whatever. So, I think that makes a ton of sense. In terms of getting them to do that, I mean, you could feed them that same pinky every day or every other day, and they can take it. I don't suggest
Interesting.
it, but they
Yeah.
can. So
I have a 1.3 group now of adults, and I'm trying my hand. 1.2 came in semi recently. I got a clutch of 5, and they've unfortunately all gone bad, like dropped one by one after a few weeks, which really kind of, threw a wrench in my soul. But I was like,
right,
all right, we'll kind of take it. I'm chalking it up to because I got them in recently, and maybe she got gravid beforehand, and the flight
sure.
disturbance or whatever. So I don't know. I'm hoping I have another girl that's going soon. She appears somewhat gravid. I'm going to keep pairing that male up and keep feeding the females because I know they probably have a couple clutches left in them, and I know how abundant they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what did those eggs? Just if you want to talk through it, I'm happy to chat through it. Well, so what did the eggs look like, and what temp did you incubate them at? I think you said you just shoebox them in the room, right? But what did those temps
Yeah,
fluctuate?
I'm room temping it. It's probably around 80, like 78, 80.
Okay.
in the room. Yeah, so and the eggs, I actually have a picture of it on my Instagram. I'll pull it up real quick. I'll just share the screen. Which is funny because it looks like a bad post now, but I candled them too. The eggs, hold on. They looked fertile and all that. Let's see this here. That was them.
Yeah, so they're a little yellow, but that doesn't not negatively so. They look pretty normal to me. It usually looks a good size. My suggestion, just if it were me, so I shoebox the Rhino eggs, but I have that same temp in the room. I would put them in the lowest spot at the coolest temperature you possibly can.
Possibly.
To me, okay. 78 is a high. 78 is like a maximum temperature. Not.
I thought about putting them in my bedroom where it stays like mid to low 70s, but I was like, I don't know if that's too cold.
To me, no. I mean, I've in general, if you cooked them at a straight bake 78, it should be basically 60 days, similar to rhinos. With rhinos, I've had them like late clutches in the year. I had one that, I was doing in the basement in a 5-gallon bucket with vermiculite, and but because it had come late and we started getting low temps, I was getting low temps in there at like 60, 61. And they hatched at 119 to 121 days. So literally doubled it, getting that over. What I would say too is if you're cooking over 78, you're definitely running the risk. And presumably it's like the leopard gecko thing, right? Where color fixes at 18 days or 20 days or whatever. So if people, going back to when people were trying to make high yellow leopard geckos, they would cook them high, they wanted, right. So the melanin was associated with incubating at low temperatures, but because those are temperature sex determined, they would cook them to try and make nice looking females. They would cook them for the first, so the sex determination they figured out happened at 18 days or 21 days or whatever it was. And so they would cook them at that low temperature for that 18 to 21 days until the gender was set. And then they would put them at a higher temperature to try and make them look prettier, right? So they wouldn't have the melanin associated with being incubated at a lower temperature. But so I have no idea what I would posit here, have posited before, is that in Porphyracia, and certainly in rhinos, and in my experience in Porphyracia as well, and I would note that the early breedings associated with rhinos and Porphyracia, particularly coxeye, invariably you would see them sold as reverse trios because invariably they were sitting on a bunch of males and their incubation temperature was more like standard colubrid, 80, 82. And certainly in my experience, if you cook at 78, you get a mix. If you cook lower than that, you're more likely to get females.
Really?
If you cook at a solid 82 and over, you're probably going to have kink babies and just a mess, to be honest.
Okay.
So, being in a variable space, I don't think it's that bad. But if I were in your spot, I would cook them as low as I could.
So honestly, that's a good tip. Then I'm putting them in my room. That settles that. I'm bringing them upstairs. Yeah.
I haven't seen a negative associated with it, other than that it takes longer. I haven't seen any.
And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with waiting.
Yeah. And if you're still if your low temperature that you're talking about is like 72, then I think maybe you're going to hit 75 days or something like that. But I don't think you'll have any issues hatching them out.
Okay. Cool. Fine by me. All right, that's good to know. I'm hoping I didn't cook them because again, to add, it's definitely not because I hatch Texas rats in here and I get a delay. And I'll be honest, I don't know the exact temps right now, but past 2 years consistently, I've been hatching Texas rats 65 to 67 days, which tells you it's not really in the 80s, because if it was, they'd be hatching at 60 or earlier.
Right. That's sort of the norm at a higher temperature. Right. So no, I think that's probably, I just give you that tip from my end of saying, cool. And if you don't want to really undershoot it, then I just put them on the floor in your room.
Yeah.
Have them literally,
that makes sense too.
Rather than going crazy cold and potentially overdoing it, I would just say, what's the coldest I could possibly do them in here, but still feel comfortable about it, so that you're saying maybe the range on them goes 75 to 80, but most of the time you're in that 75 to 78 range, in your daily swing. Yeah, I think you'll be golden, man.
Cool.
And I'm
Awesome.
not saying that's what happened here. I think you're probably right that this is anytime in your space, especially depending on the time, it does seem like if they're not laid when, maybe because of that change, she wasn't as comfortable nesting or laying or whatever, and maybe she laid them a couple days late. So even though you had venation, you might have had like essentially some of that, the porousness that allows oxygen distribution through the cell. Maybe there's this, who knows? There could be anything. So yeah, I don't think you fried them. I'm just saying,
Okay.
if it was
Cool.
me, that's what I would do.
Okay. Awesome. No, that's a good tip. I appreciate that. All right, man. Cool. Let's that was some good Porphyracia talk for all my bamboo lovers. Honestly, they're what got me into the Asian rat snakes. Like seeing Matt's Facebook is what got Coxeye was my first animal. I still my first Asian rat snake animal. I still have her. So yeah, I love them.
They're really cool, man. They're super fun, and they are. It sounds like yours align with this. They're generally, to me, the calmest of those, least likely to be super crazy.
They're not. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I use a hook sometimes on the adults, like just to like break that, because I feel like anytime it's the hand, you go in with the hand, they're coming at you.
Yeah,
like
come on a finger for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But generally, once you have them out, they're not that bad.
Yes.
I would say too that those are not something in my experience that you would want to super hard cool. So like, and maybe this is a transition point or whatever. So when I lived in Michigan and had them in an unfinished basement that did not have great window sealing and all this different stuff, there was a day that I had walked in and the room was 38 degrees. Obviously in winter, so they were in a cooling period, but the rhinos were active at that temperature, meaning that they were moving and they would tongue flick. They did seem more like a Gonyosoma at that moment, in the sense that they would stick out the tongue and then like a Oxycephalum or a Jansenii, just leaving it outside of their face, rocking it up and down for 10, 12 seconds, something like that, before pulling it back in. So very, very slowed down, like they were on ice. At those temperatures, Coxeye seemed like you could bang them on a table and that, they just seemed stone dead. They weren't. They were okay. But yeah, I would not necessarily hard cool them in that, at least at a consistently cold temperature like that. And I don't do that with rhinos either, at least on a consistent schedule. As I said, that was the constraint to the room. But there would be volatility in that, right? Even in Michigan, there would be some volatility. So they wouldn't be sitting at a solid that temperature. If you sit them solid at probably 45 to 53 or something like that, every year I would have one. So a big group of them, one of them would come out seemingly with some neurological issues associated with that. So I think being consistently solidly that cold is not good for them. Based on where they live, it's more like a diamond python where you want to have them access those cold temperatures. I'm sure it helps with sperm development, and the females certainly cycling and maturation of their follicles and all that. But I wouldn't just, set them in a fridge at 50 degrees and leave them for 2 months. I would think that would, in my experience, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, and it really interests me that, Volanti is the only one of the four that actually, you should put through a true brumation period. Being that they're all subspecies of each other. Like, I just find that really interesting, and it's a super niche behavior that you would think, like, why them and not the others,
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's probably more about the access to the cold. I think we're coming to see, right, that from the 80s, and obviously people were innovating all this stuff and trying to figure it out, and you could see some negative results, and that trends people's thinking, and this is mostly in a North American, colubrid context, right? But where it kind of became the idea of, you don't want rapid change or you don't want fluctuation. And if we're talking about dramatic fluctuation into and out of a operating temperature, okay, that's one thing. But I think just for the most part, these things probably are not living our own experience, right? Whatever colubrids you would see where you live. I live in Colorado, where, the bull snakes, they'll come out, for a random day. If it, as it can be 70 degrees, they might come out and bask and then go back down. And it might be 3 weeks before that happens again or whatever. I think recognizing that volatility, It can't hurt. And so any of these straight bake things, so even with Bionti, I wouldn't necessarily just fridge them like that. It's certainly at that cold of a temperature, maybe 55 to 59, 60. You might be okay, but I would say more so if your room can do that or can facilitate that, then I would just kind of turn the heat off, and maybe you don't even have it on anyway, but just sort of let them tell you,
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So yeah, Justin's question gives us a good chance to kind of segue over to Rhino talk. And you could answer his question first before we kind of get into it, but have you seen better / larger clutches with a more dedicated cooldown over not doing one at all?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't know that I have a real sample size on what most people would probably take as not doing one at all, because my room has a ton of variability to it, and I, generally speaking, don't have them on additional heat beyond the light source either. So that over the course of the year, they're probably getting the nighttime low, I think in that room at sort of chest height is like, over the last couple of years, is some 63 degrees. Probably lower on, as you get closer to the floor. So maybe if we said 59, 60, something like that. And in the summer, the all-time high over the last handful of years is like 86.5, 87, something like that. So there's variance to that, as opposed to saying if you kept them at 78, if your room, say, it was hermetically sealed and stayed 78 degrees all day, all year round, what would happen? I guess the Denver Zoo had them in the Tropical Discovery on display there and produced them despite being maintained at certainly a daytime high in the low 80s, and a nighttime low that probably didn't go below 75 all year, and didn't pull them off display, and they produced them fine. So I think, generally speaking, the answer would be no, but I don't have a ton of experience myself, not having put some variance into the system.
Cool. Yeah, and as we go into that, let's talk about your Rhino collection a bit, because if I'm not mistaken, one of the pictures that's on your Instagram, and we can look on it at it. So with the Rhinos, obviously the base color is your standard green, but there are some of these like blue Rhinos out there, and I know a lot of them come mainly from Europe. But if I'm not mistaken, you have some, do you not?
Oh, absolutely, because to me, those are all the original Klaus animals produced that look. So that's the first animals that I had. The first animals literally that came to the United States. I could be wrong, but my impression of it is that the look, the one animal that's used to sell those other animals, and I don't mean to be controversial, I just think this is true, is almost certainly just an old animal from that lineage. So this here is like a 3 years old in this picture. It is a female, so it's like the chondro thing, where they definitely have, the hormonal blue can happen. That being said, that lineage of animals also has them look blue before they've gone through their first follicular cycle. It also, you see it in males as well. So that bloodline definitely has the capacity to throw blue animals, and I just think that particular animal that's, the sales photo, so to speak, is juiced in the sense that it looks to me like an old animal from that lineage that has probably had 5, 6, 7, 8 clutches. So it's all doubled down, and then the lighting on that is a little interesting as well. So again, I'm just saying, just saying that to me, that look is certainly beautiful and is more accessible maybe than people think. And I think there's a little bit of salesmanship or people not being aware of that history that comes to play with that. At the same time, I mean, shoot, if you go through the Instagram, you can find ones that are from wild caught to wild caught that I produced here on, I got half changed animals back in 2013. And I get blue stuff out of those as well. So yeah, if you peek through it, there's plenty of that. In fact, that
I'm scrolling my way.
That one that you posted there is actually from that line.
Okay.
That's wild caught to wild caught.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not actually even from that lineage. But yeah, if as you go through those, you certainly see them. There's one that's in a cork tube that, I mean, that's pretty blue. So
Yeah. And now, how do you feel? Because I don't, how many, or I should start with, how many rhinos are you typically producing in like a year? Because I know that's where your colubrid collection is mostly at this point.
yeah, as I said, so one piece of advice would be, if you get to a space where you're producing, a lot of that, it used to be the case that we'd sell males cheaper. And, I had a period of time where I was, let me try different things and all this. The long story short would be that I sent out too many males and certainly too cheaply. And so I wound up being in a spot where I'm saying, oh, wow, I have this, at least last year, based on sort of the size where they were at and all this different stuff, one male that I was trying to use across 5 females. And with these, what that usually means is you get 5 clutches of slugs. So they're interesting to produce in the sense that they breed more like a boa would. And if you go even back to when they were first sort of becoming popular, or first available in the US and then becoming popular, like 98 to 2003, a lot of people weren't very successful colubrid breeders. Kathy Love, was selling her animals because they weren't having success with them. And the reason is that you need to keep them paired up as a pair for a lot longer than you do with a corn snake or a Getula King or something like that, where you toss them together and they breed immediately, and that's enough to do it for the season, maybe even multiple clutches out of that one pairing. They definitely are not like that. If you can actually maintain them together in pairs, you're most likely to have success, right? Yeah. Particularly through their whole cycle and all of this, so that they're in sync throughout that process. You're the most likely to have them be aligned and have that male in there at the exact right time, so that him being there prompts her to build them. And then when you hit that window where they're right at the point where she needs to be bred, that you're going to have that success. So using a male across multiple females probably isn't going to work. Right. To be honest. Okay. So I would suggest people have pairs. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because that's kind of like two elements to it that make it seem like, rhinos don't seem as hard as they've always been made out to be, I will say. So when I was getting into the Asian stuff, the rhinos was one of the things that was like huge for me. I was like, oh my God, this rhino rat snake, whatever. And I didn't get one for a very, very long time because I was too scared to kill it. Just straight up, because I had heard over all this time and in the research I did that they were these hard to keep animals. And it wasn't until Billy Hunt convinced me, like, dude, if you're keeping cockeye, he's like, you got it, you can keep them. I'm like, you sure? He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah. Okay. So, and then I finally got one, and I was like, okay, I can keep them. And now I have a subadult female and a hatchling male that I'm growing very cool, up. Man. So, yeah.
No, that's super cool. I laugh I certainly understand where that message, comes out. I've tried to fight it, as much as I can, and it does seem like people have picked it up in the sense that
this year especially, I've seen
way more people are having success.
I've seen it. Well, yeah, between success and like even people just getting them as like a first time, whether it's a first time rat snake or first time Asian species, like, so it's been really interesting to see that. So I think that stigma might be starting to kind of break on them, because they're being seen a lot more.
To me, man, they are the hardiest captive snake that I've ever worked with. They're the easiest. Yeah. The only thing that they really don't do well with is being overly wet. That's being overly wet or being fed too much. Those two things, if you don't do those two things, you could keep them at 40 degrees or you could keep them at 85 degrees. You could keep, they can be bone dry, or they can, you could change their water every day. You can, feed them once a week, or you could not feed them for 6 months. On adult animals, there's a certain there are qualifiers to those things that I'm saying. But the two rules are, don't have them be constantly wet. So if you're keeping on a substrate that maintains moisture, it needs to drain. Absolutely. Ventilation is good. I would over ventilate it. you're in a place with high ambient humidity. So
Yeah.
looking at where they come from naturally, I think they're on they're living on limestone karst that is very porous, so that, yeah, they do, the catbah population, right, is what I'm thinking of at this point, is on that limestone karst. I'm sure that there's daily like a crazy fog and humidity cycle being on the literal ocean, but it burns off and soaks down so that they have essentially, sure, they get exposed to that high level of moisture, but then it's going to dry out. There's a clear cycle to that, and you need to maintain that. Otherwise, and the feeding thing, I wouldn't feed them rats. I don't like.
Yeah.
I've seen some gross looking ones. They're not meant to look like that. Even
Yep.
I have animals that are, the oldest female. So from that original group, I lost that original female that had come in from Klaus at, I think, 18 or 19 years old, something like that. And she wasn't a big snake, even at that point, almost 20 years old, So, was, more or less the same size as they get to within 3 or 4 years, and stayed the same throughout that. So, and they do I've seen it where it seems like they improperly store fat, if they're not being used to eating, especially sort of fatty rats or whatever, or being overfed mice, that you can get like essentially tumors that develop as a process of improper fat storage on the outside of their body. Yeah. Which is gnarly. And the sort of scale rot type situation from being over moist.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, one thing I found interesting so far, and it's really only been a few months of keeping, but the subadult female, just her size, like she's long, but she's skinny. And when I think it was probably Justin that told me like, hey, like feed them a little bit smaller, and who I got it from, she's eating this. And I was like, okay, by her size, it makes sense. And like, their mouths don't go as wide as like something like Texas rats do. So I was like, this makes sense. So I'm feeding real small. She's hungry every time I feed her, and I'm like, that's all good. And even the baby too. I like seeing the growth he's kind of putting on, but I know I definitely can't push it with him either.
I mean, and dude, I've done it. I've tried it all. I had one female that was going into cycling for a season, and I fed her 7 weaned mice in a go. Okay. She then proceeded to lay the largest clutch I've ever had for him, 17 eggs that year.
Really?
But I wouldn't recommend that at this point. Maybe now like 3 hoppers, and then a couple days later I might give her 3 hoppers again. Something like that is what I would do now.
Okay.
So, but I mean, their capacity to do it is really high.
So you prefer multiple small meals? Is that what you were gonna say?
Yeah. So I certainly that's what I do now and would recommend. What I was going to say is the interesting thing is that females tend to grow like males, where this long, lean structure. The first time you pair that animal, just expose that animal to a mature male, all of a sudden they start growing like a loaf of bread. So their weight, way they hold their weight shifts upon their first exposure, really. So it's presumably like a hormonal cue that causes them to hold their weight differently.
Interesting. That's pretty cool.
But in general, I would say that if you look at them, that especially once they're like maybe mid-color change, that you can tell males and females apart based on males are much skinnier relative to their length in general.
Okay.
And females tend to be shorter or stockier, squatter, and males, get substantially larger and will, as I said, but what you're talking about is definitely noticeable in terms of females that haven't been exposed to a male grow differently than even, it's like that first shed cycle, a switch flips.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I'm super excited to see them kind of grow up and how they do, and I'd love to expand the group a little bit more. So I'm just looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Cool, yeah. Man. And heck, they might turn blue. I guess that's my message. Is not that those are not, I'm not knocking anyone's project or saying that those won't look blue. It's just saying that I don't know that you need to get it from there to have one that you can be happy about how blue it is. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's good to know. And I mean, the subadult I have, I mean, she's well through her color change. I've posted her before, but Yeah, I mean, not that I see blue, but like I like the color of green and all like the in between white and black specks between the scales. Like I like how she's looking, and I definitely like that look better than some of the others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you want to throw? So yeah, I have thoughts on this. You want to throw that one up on the
Yeah,
screen?
sure.
I'd be
I'll
happy to
throw
take
it
a
up.
look at it.
Yeah, hold on one second. Let's see. When did I post her? Actually, you know what? I'll just pull her out. She actually just had a fresh shed.
Cool.
I forgot I fed them like a couple hours ago. Yeah, let's not do that. Okay, I have a video of her here. Hold on. Throw it up there. Let's see. I don't know if that's coming through well.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, she's pretty awesome. When I pulled her out, I mean, I was like, holy shit. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Just all that. Yeah. So I that's kind of the look that I tend to like on them. Not that I don't like kind of the plain lime green ones, but I like the kind of speckling that one gives in comparison, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So the plainest ones that I've seen are generally the wild ones, for whatever reason that may be.
Okay.
So like, wild caught ones do actually for Asian rat snakes, surprisingly, which is funny then in the context or the idea that they don't do well in captivity. Of probably 15 or so wild ones that I've had, only one of them didn't do well relative to establishing and taking off and all of that over the years, so tons of different shipments, and that shipment was messed up. I was just talking to someone about this, maybe on a show. So yeah, so the blue that he's referencing there would be those original animals that were originally collected. At the same time, I'm seeing blue stuff out of a wild caught Chinese pair that I have. So,
okay.
In terms of that blue line, I mean, shoot, maybe the thing that's funny to me about the whole blue line thing is that I was pitching those original animals, had the descriptor blue line on those from 2008. And, so yeah, it's just funny to me that was like, quote, the new thing or, whatever. But yeah, referencing those original Vietnamese animals. But yeah, what I was going to say, and, seeing it in that animal there is that in general, so the wild ones tend to have less of that interstitial pattern going on, tend to be plainer. But additionally, right, is that beyond their body shape, that in general, you can sex most rhinos once they've changed color based on what they look like. So in general, you would describe a male as a lighter green and yellow snake, particularly on like the whole belly, whereas females tend to be something you would describe as more of like a dark green with white with blue. But yeah, so that's females certainly can have yellow. I'm not saying that if it has yellow that it's not a female, particularly on babies. A lot of those have yellow chins. So that's not determinative. Really, the body form thing, it's kind of, you take all of it collectively. What I can referencing having wild caught ones, I had gone up to Cameron's the first time he got in wild Chinese rhinos in 2005, and he got one or a pair, and then a week later he got in a group that was just 6 or 7. And having just bought that pair the week before, I looked in the tank and was a little bit nonplussed because I was able to see that it was 6.1. And I was like, from 5 feet away, I was like, yeah, I want that one. And he was like, Ryan was working there, and he was like, oh yeah, you just wanted the one or whatever. And Cameron called me back and said, absolutely not. You got to take some of these males, take some of these other ones. And I was like, I didn't even touch it, man. I was 5 feet away. And that wasn't
that's crazy.
Wasn't
that's interesting. So I've never heard that as well. So just I'll be honest, I never probed this animal. It was produced by Terry Burwell, sold to, oh my God. Shoot. His name is slipping me right now. He's a well-known dude. He does Rear Fang Rarities.
Okay.
It's slipping me. Someone probably knows in the chat. I got it from him, and it was sold to me as a female. So what you're saying is mine is likely based on looks. Yeah, Dan Sheehan. Thank you. You're saying that one looks like a female based on what you would normally characterize them.
So it's interesting because it has the body thickness, particularly in the rear half, that I would say looks female. Like sort of its body form looks to me to be female. Yeah, I would look at the tail. So just like you do with any colubrid, right? Where like they definitely have a stronger, and it's easier when you have lots of them, right? So that I recognize that, but like usually, like between looking at the tail, if you see that rapid narrowing, that's helpful. The other thing, and I think it probably goes back to the whole egg incubation piece, in terms of I definitely have seen some gender benders that look like one in terms of their presentation, but then they'll probe like in between. So most females are very shallow. So it's like 2 to 3 to 4 maybe. Then and most males, literally it swallows it 15, 12, 15. But I've had some that are in that 5 to 8. I had one that looked very female and was in that 5 to 8, but all the males would fight with it like it was a male.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly that's probable size. I would probe it, and hopefully it goes 4 or less. And as I say, the body form on that in the rear half, that looks right. I mean, in general, it's I'm trying the best that I can to describe sort of what is in my mind, but worth a probe. But yeah, I wouldn't be too worried.
Okay, got it. And Lisa was asking in the chat, do you keep any of your rhino pairs cohabbed year round?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And
that would be my recommendation if you have the setup to accommodate it. And you just need to have some dexterity in terms of in the smaller season of the window. So for the most part, males will only, they'll shut off going in at the end of the fall or whatever. And for the most part, on mature males, they won't feed when there are females in the room, be they the one they're paired with or one next door or whatever, that haven't yet ovulated. So, and some of them are more insistent on that than others. I had one wild male that legitimately wouldn't eat for 8.5 or 9 months out of the year between the period of time he was cooling and until the last female had ovulated. He was also super problematic relative to being paired with females, overly aggressive, biting. Their skin is very resilient, but it's the only thing it's not resilient to is either being kept too wet and you get sort of this rot condition, and being bitten by themselves or their own species, so that it looks like he cut them with razor blades. Like it literally almonds out. It can be pretty gnarly. And with him, it was always a question of whether I would leave him in there long enough to feel confident that she would lay a successful clutch that season, or if she was just taking too much of a beating to be able to stomach it. Like I have on I think on the Instagram, certainly on the Facebook or whatever, there's a picture of a female that is wrapped around a clutch of eggs. And if you don't look at the eggs, if you look at her body, you can see that she has muscle hanging out of her body from where he had bitten her.
Really?
Yeah, and she's since recovered and laid many clutches. She's here now and doing great and whatever. They have also heal remarkably well. Didn't do anything with that. She just on the next shed it was closed up and whatever. So it's not a huge concern, but that really illustrates with that he was by far the worst of any that I've had.
Okay.
But, and certainly if you put 2 males together, you'll wind up with that as well.
Gotcha. All right. And then when it comes to enclosures, like what are you doing there? What kind of sizing? How do you kind of deck them out? What's your go-to for the rhinos?
So again, I've done all the different things that you can do, and they are, again, being super adaptable. They're very amenable to whatever. So I've kept them in The Freedom Breeder especially is growing out. The Freedom Breeder hatchling tub lasts a really long time. And then the one that's, the 30 or 35, the V35, that's the double width of that same size. They do really well in that.
Yeah, I like the 18s or whatever Freedom Breeder calls them. But yeah.
So I bred them in that size. That's not necessarily what bred them in 28 quarts. Now I have them set up in glass tanks that, again, associated with trying to keep less differently or keep less better and all that, but yeah, that's sort of, they're super amenable to that, even in a low humidity environment. So all the different things, all of them can work. What I would say is if you keep them in something that's too small, it does seem like maybe that's been associated with, they'll get in chondros, there's like, maybe Schmitty can help me with what, it's like a neck fold type thing that isn't really at the neck, but it'll be maybe 20% of the way down the body. It's almost like their skin is pinched. And I don't know definitively that this is what caused it, but I do wonder if that's being kept in too tight of a tub for too long. And I can say that, they will, based on how I have them set up now, they'll utilize their entire habitat, be it subterranean, terrestrial, and arboreal, and I have some that prefer, now that they can choose any of those three. I see that particular ones have particular preferences. So offering any context where you could offer all those possibilities, I think has value.
Yeah. I could say personally right now, I am keeping all racks at the moment, and that's just what works in my space. But for the first species that will 100% get an upgrade, and one that I'd like to see in caging, it's going to be the rhinos for sure. Just from what I've heard from, everyone that's talked about them, it seems like they do really well, and they become more well-rounded animals with more natural lighting, the bigger cage, climbing spaces, and all that. So yeah, it's something I definitely want to move towards as well.
Yeah, they certainly viewed through the lens of, do they absolutely need it? No, they don't. You can keep them in tiny tubs and they'll do great, but they are so, generally speaking, so willing and engaging that you're just not getting your maximal experience out of it.
I agree. That's the thing, is I want to see that snake all the time. I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've heard about Justin said he hasn't seen that yet. I've heard about it because I listened to some conjure stuff, though I don't know a ton about it, but I've heard of it, the neck fold thing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I didn't know about it beforehand, but just in terms of I then started hearing about it from people, and it makes me wonder if part of it is it's not even from being too shallow, it's just if they're pushing. It made me wonder. So that's on the far more speculative end. I guess I would just say if you can give them a little bit of height, then all the better.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, that was kind of a good breakdown of, between porfs and rhinos. That was a lot, and I still have quite a few kind of questions and stuff to go through. Were there any other species that you wanted to maybe highlight that you've kept before? Anything that you potentially want to talk about before we kind of move on to the next segment?
No, there's a ton of cool animals out there, and people like what they like, and I do encourage people to maybe try for longer than a week or 2 weeks or whatever. I don't know what could happen in that time that would make something either a fit or not, but or I guess at the same time, maybe if inherently, you open the box and said, yeah, not for me, that's totally fine, but that doesn't mean it's a deficiency with that animal, So I encourage people to try, but maybe to actively try if they're going to do that. But yeah, Alterna are cool. Leonis are cool. The Schmitty's on here. We got the, I love those Lassiter Paint Shop podcasts. Those have been good. It sounds like that he was busy recording cigar stuff, so they weren't able to do one that I'd be able to listen to now. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I'm sure it'll get rectified.
Yeah, hopefully. Justin saying Gagnos in the chat. You mentioned that you have experience with some of the other, or I'll call them the other Gagnosoma, the true oxys and Jansenii have you kept?
Yeah. So Jansenii,
Yeah.
black Jansenii, oxys, the silver ones that are, were flower, or the silver and orange ones, which are really cool. I don't see many of that. You see the silver stuff now, but you don't really see the flower eye that were the silver and orange and just totally weird. You don't see that stuff so much now, but those Frenatum, and then, Prasinum, Radinov is what it, how the whole thing's so messy relative to how we used to know it, but certainly Prasinum and Frenatum, which to me are essentially a hornless rhino. So I had one of those wild caught ones came in with the horn half hanging off, and then when it shed it off completely. And man, if you just looked at it, you'd say, oh, that's Frenatum. And I wouldn't disagree. So to me, those two are sister taxa that go together. And if I had my druthers, there would be Rhynchophus, and it would be Boulangerii and Frenatum. The Hainan thing, I don't know. I'll just say I haven't seen those animals. So, whatever.
I mean, I've brought it up on multiple occasions, especially with Justin, but like, I think it's a kind of like subspecies. Okay, maybe, but to make it a full species seems kind of redundant.
The politics of taxonomy is just sort of, I don't know, it lacks an eye stripe. Well, the whole thing, like that, I definitely got wild ones that had partial or very reduced eye stripes. So there's going to be a bottleneck on an island, right? And if you started, I don't know. What I would say also is in terms of the wild ones, I guess my big question with it is just sample size, right? Both in terms of from the island and then from the mainland, and like where those original founder animals might have come from, because the whole thing with like the L'Oreal scales and all that, I've seen huge variance in that, both from original stuff with known locality data, from import stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So to me, that's a non-starter that reflects a sample size thing. I don't know, politics of taxonomy from my perspective. I don't have them, and I have no interest in getting them. So that's fine,
Yeah. Cool. Actually, one thing that you kind of mentioned that I wanted to hit on, you mentioned the melanistic, or I did want to have a question about the like melanistic. I guess, are they supposed to be Oxycephalum or Jansenii?
Yeah, it's funny that
like the all black
ones. So when they're born, they look like oxys. They're green with purple tails and stuff, and they become But I think they are Jansenii. It's just showing the interrelatedness of those, which again, then I would just highlight of, hey, maybe why Rhynchophus, meaning Boulangerii and Frenatum, and Hainanensis, if you want to say that, would be different, is that, okay, so we have animals that have the capacity, meaning true Ganis, from my perspective, that have the air sacs in their throat that they can puff up, put on a very impressive display. None of the three, to my sense, Rhynchophus, have that. Those three are all born gray babies with black, white, and yellow inclusions. Frenatum being more of the black and yellow, rhinos being more of the black and white. But all those babies look super similar, whereas black Jansenii are born looking like Oxycephalum. At some point here, Justin's going to have beautiful little Jansenii that normative Jansenii, which are super cool. That'll be super exciting. So
well, the reason I asked was I thought it was interesting, and I forget, because I do see like the pitch black melanistic ones, but I thought I've seen Oxycephalum as well, and maybe I'm mistaken. But people have had, I think Nerd has had the all black melanistic Oxycephalum.
Yeah, I mean,
I may have seen Jansenii as well, but then I saw an Instagram post recently that said there was a person that kind of thought that they might be something on its own entirely, because I think they were potentially subject to a different locality, and that all black version was coming from one area, and I should have like saved the post or something, because I actually found it interesting, and I was like, I sent it in a group chat. I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. That would be neat if something were to come out of that. But
so those are interesting. I think those are all going to be the same thing and be what we called in the early 2000s black Jansenii. So the Denver Zoo had a pair of big adult wild black Jansenii, and that they kept together. And over, I think it took 4 years to figure out how to hatch a Jansenii egg with a good, healthy baby. So, hey, Schmitty, you're doing great. But the point is that all the ones that were in the hobby until relatively recently were those animals. Basically no one else was producing them, but because zoos didn't want them, we were buying them as surplus. So yeah, I had like functionally all of those. So I've worked with them a lot, grown them up. They look like oxys and then they turn black, and we'd sell them to Freight Fritas, which, Matt knows them, a name from back in the day. And, but yeah, in terms of the nerd stuff, well, I wouldn't doubt that there's the possibility of having a melanistic oxycephalum. In general, those all look to me like black Jansenii from Cell AR. So that all to me kind of fits. So.
Gotcha. All right.
Cool animal for sure.
Yeah.
They're
cool
definitely
looking.
kind of a black milk snake sort of thing where they go through that, gradually gain melanin, and then you get this all black, cool looking critter that puffs out its throat, and definitely
that's the
cool.
thing is, yeah, for sure. I wanted to highlight, it was a question from earlier, but I didn't touch on it just before we go into the next segment. Adam, he's one of the Patreon members. He asked, if you get a chance, can you guys go through how you treat your Asian rats different than North American species, specifically ambient temp / hotspot, etc.? Thanks. And I think he's from the same general region as you as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool.
And you're where? I'm sorry?
Colorado.
Yeah, I think he's in Colorado as well. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so, very cool.
This question may pertain more to you.
Yeah, so just before I do that, I see Schmitty's got this here, so I don't want to get distracted, with that. Utah. Okay, cool. Yeah, functionally very similar.
What that
in terms of, maybe I would trust Dan more than me. Mine's just coming from, whatever the labels were from literally, 20 years ago at this point. So sure, if Dan said Gempia, all good, man. I don't know. I haven't been over there. It's exciting, and I don't doubt it, but I certainly would not argue with him about it. In terms of the question of North American versus Asian stuff, I think I don't, at this point, wouldn't keep them dramatically differently, right? So I just have parapine snakes at this point in terms of North American stuff, but keep them, functionally the same. I really believe in having the consistency of variability, right? So your room has a natural cycle across, and you can obviously, you could add to this, right, by having additional lights and whatever. But if there's lighting in the room, particularly in Utah, right, unless you've hermetically sealed it or really well insulated it, you're going to have annual variation in temperature in the course of the room. I think maybe the aspect in saying that jumps out, so it'll be temperature. You might have light, depending on if you have light in the room. You'll see variability there. Humidity, probably, although you're probably pretty dry generally. Same thing as here. And then I try and align all those factors with the other things that I'm doing in terms of food that I'm offering. So trying to align all of those stimuli so that they coincide with one another rather than fighting it. So I'm not feeding them in the middle of the winter, right? That sort of thing. The thing that jumped out to me is it does seem like maybe the North American stuff is more amenable to just a hard cooling. Certainly, I mean, that's sort of the standard recipe. Maybe not at those super low temperatures, but below 60 or whatever it is, to just fridge things that are North American colubrids and keep them that way for 2 months, 10 weeks, whatever it is, and then pop them out, and then they'll do fine without seeing any of those neurological problems. Again, maybe some of that is the low temperature being a little bit higher than sort of what I've played with before, but it does seem like they have maybe a greater capacity to just sort of sit and shut down, whereas rhinos, I mean, it reminds me of being from Denver, where I described like what I'm saying with the bull snakes, where if the weather's nice, there's a variability to it. It could be cold, it could be warm, and they're going to play into that cycle, and they're unlikely to just go hunker away. Instead, it's going to be sort of, they are, so that, they keep their core minimum temperature, but if it warms up, then they're responsive to that and they'll engage with it. It seems like the North American stuff, you don't have to do that as much.
Yeah. I mean, just speaking from my piece, and I think Adam's heard me say it a whole bunch on different in different areas, but like, I mean, I've had no problem keeping them essentially the same in the same room. Obviously, I can't speak to being successfully breeding Asian species yet, so I can't really say I've done a good job of that, but I've been able to do it with the North American stuff, and I've been able to keep the Asian stuff at least, and they're growing and they seem healthy. So that's as much as I can give. When it does come to the cooling, though, that's where I take that aspect, and I don't have a proper way to brewmate, and I've said it a bunch of times. I've basically taken them, put them in lock tubs up in my closet where it gets cooler than it does in here. I don't feed them and no light, so that's kind of where I, that's where I get my cycle from. It doesn't get down into the 50s like other people do, but that's how I've been able to kind of make it work. Obviously, as I move out from my parents' house, I'd hope to get better technology to be able to kind of increase or something to increase my success and ability to work with stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah. All right, cool, man. Now I always give light because, one thing I've noticed is colubrid keepers are also very diverse keepers. And you've kept a whole bunch of stuff along with, your field herping, which we're going to talk about as well. But, talk about some of the others. I don't know if you're keeping, I only asked before, like, what colubrids are you currently keeping, but what about other species? So what else is going on in the collection right now? I know you've kept a lot, but what's going on right now?
Yeah, so the other main things that I have or have groups of at this point are Jamaican boas, Puerto Rican boas, and Solomon Island tree boas. Those are, again, Jamaican boas and Puerto Rican boas, very cool. They're, Endangered Species Act listed. You can't sell them across state lines, so I don't sell them at all.
Okay.
And I don't pay for, it's all, people genuinely working with something that they just are super into. And for me, as I said, that goes back to my initial exposure to herp literature and stuff, 98, saying, hey, you won't be able to have these, but these are really cool animals that live in, Puerto Rico and all that. And they function really well. I find them to be super similar, and function in the same climatic conditions of the room. And I guess that would be my recommendation, is generally speaking to work with things that then where you're not fighting the room, right? So yeah. I know Dave D, right, who's also in Denver, keeps a bunch of chondros. That you have to put in a ton of work to modify your room to make that work. And that's totally doable. But if you don't do that, then you're probably not going to have success. And if you probably then won't be able to do things that aren't similarly aligned with those modifications that you've made. So it's just making sure that you can have things from all over the world if there's alignment in terms of amenability to your conditions. If your natural conditions are dramatically different than what they require, then you need those inputs, and you're probably foreclosing yourself from doing things that don't do well with the changes that you've made.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, for sure. Another thing I wanted to, did I miss anything else? Any other species there that you're working with?
Nah, man, I'm still trying to, have less, and just do.
Yeah,
just really, make sure. Yeah, there have been points in time. Again, it's super cool to have, 50 Alterna, 45, 50 Leonis, another 30 Zanata, all this stuff. But it was at that point that I realized I wanted to change something, because your only interaction is opening the tub. And in the case of Zanata, watching him flee to the back. So I had plenty of beautiful Zanata, the California mountain king snakes and all that. But like, legitimately, you'd open them and they just shoot to the back, and it's like, okay, and repeat and whatever. Leonis and Alterna tend to be a little more engaging and whatever, but okay. I appreciate a lot of things. It's been really cool to work with a lot of things, have that opportunity, and certainly, both of those are highly variable. All three of those, locale variation and all that stuff. But at this point, like, that's just not where I'm at. So
no, cool. That's totally fine. One other aspect about you that I obviously wanted to hit on is that you are part of the NPR network. So there's a plug. Guys, if you're listening, go check out Reptile Fight Club on there. He does that with Dr. Julander. I only got into that recently, to be honest. I kind of didn't know about it. And I got tuned into NPR semi-recently, and I started to appreciate some of that content. So I've been enjoying those episodes for sure. I just caught up on the last two actually, like yesterday. So.
Oh, very cool. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. Justin used to do that show with our buddy Chuck Poland. And then Chuck has had some life circumstances change and whatever, so that in the fall, Justin had said, hey, can you help me do this? And if you're not going to help me do this, then I'm not going to do it or whatever. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fine. Excited for it. And honestly, it's been, I think people maybe get upset that we're not fighting as much as they're hoping for based on the title or whatever. But in reality, I've been sort of using it as a context to talk to a lot of content creators that, I'm just interested in hearing from, and so most of what that has looked like is people that are going on YouTube that are going looking for reptiles, things, or I'm just seeing their content on Instagram. But, it's been a lot of field herping stuff because I think there's a ton of cool stuff to talk about there. And a lot of those people are people that I haven't heard on other shows and stuff. So it's, definitely been a really cool opportunity, and I'm excited to keep doing that and definitely have both, it's cool. Ron St. Pierre is awesome to talk to all the time. Unfortunately, we had tech difficulties associated with, I heard about a really cool show. We're gonna fix it. We're gonna redo it and whatever. But it's a bummer because that was probably the best one that we've done, and then it was wound up being just me and Ron's audio that came through. Justin's, for whatever reason, didn't work.
Oh man.
You hear, just these absences and whatever. So, nevertheless, a lot of the, what I've been doing now is like, man, there's so many people posting cool field herp stuff on YouTube and on Instagram. And it's like, hey, I want to talk to that guy about what it's like herping in Georgia or what it's like herping in Florida or these people, so much of it's so impressive to me where it's one thing to do something that I otherwise would do. So, my posts of field herping stuff, well, I'm doing that either way, whether 10 people like it, 1,000 people like it, whatever it is, that doesn't matter to me. But like, there are people on there that are making like YouTube herping shows or have a channel or whatever, and they're putting out content every week, and it's like they have 100 subscribers, and it's just like, man, that resilience and consistency and all of that, I really appreciate that. So to the extent that we can, by having them on and talking through, hey, what is it that you're doing, and both giving knowledge to the community, but also kind of giving them hopefully a little bit of lift by saying, hey, I'd actually think your content, people would really enjoy what you're doing. You just haven't stumbled into it, so that, and even your thing, right? So I became aware of what you're doing associated with being on with Schmitty and Phil and Jake, and all that. And I think I am one of your subscribers, so I believe that's already.
Oh, thank you.
That's already covered.
I appreciate.
I will definitely check into it and make sure. But man, it's the resiliency and effort that takes to do that is totally different than just sort of snapping one picture or whatever. And I am impressed when people put in that consistency, even in the absence of like real clear positive feedback.
Yeah. For sure. I think there's a lot of low-key people around the hobby who have probably a lot to say or just a good opinion in general or just high spirits that, don't get as much limelight or not the, light they deserve,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, that was kind of a perfect transition because you mentioned field herping a lot. That's become a big part of what you do now in herpetoculture, from what I can understand. And I'm aware of all your guys' quest of the North American rattlesnakes, which is a pretty cool undertaking, man. I mean, it's 33 subspecies total, or species and subspecies.
Yeah, we're calling it forms. So, and that's not necessarily even like total, right? And so that's not as subject to the taxonomy, right? So it's things that maybe have been described or considered as being included before or whatever. So in the Crotalus, it's 27, and there would be 6 Cistrus, so the 3 different pygmies and 3 Massasaugas. Again, then I see somebody, I don't know, I don't see a ton of the content, but it definitely piqued my interest. Someone had just posted one, and basically theirs was like a suggestion that, oh, here's the 9 forms of Cistrus, right? So again, it's a never-ending quest, maybe, or whatever, which is sort of part of the point. It's not about ticking the box; it's giving purpose to okay, well, where should we go next? What do we want to do? This sort of thing. We'd
Yeah.
started Arizona, and then it's like, well, let's go to Texas, and then we went a little bit late, or the weather ended for the season a little bit early. So let's go in June. And that's when Schmitty and Phil went, and all this stuff. But then it became, if you're not just going to go to Arizona, Southeast Arizona, and go to West Texas, like, okay, why? What's the ideation? And so it's really given sort of, that's half the value, is just saying, hey, well, we haven't seen any of this stuff. Let's go try and find that and see what we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the herping comes the photography too, because you post some nice high quality pictures, and I know, if I'm not mistaken, you go around with a pretty solid camera out there. When did because I've always been interested in this, and there's some of those Instagram accounts, some of those people that are just herping in the Asian countries all the time and just catching all the great photography, and you guys are doing it as well with the North American stuff. I think it's super cool. But like, when did that become an aspect? When did you get into the photography kind of thing? Because you are taking great photos.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that actually has a clear line of demarcation, so that when we had gone to Australia for the first time in the fall of 2018, Chris Salemi, who works up at the Bronx Zoo and who we've known, for years and whatever, went with Eric Burke and I to Australia, to North Queensland, Cairns area, and inland a little bit to Chillago and all that. But so he'd gone on the first trip, and he has like a crazy interchangeable lens, fancy zoom lens. He had all this crazy kit, right? And he was able to take I had a really crappy, digital camera, an actual camera itself, but yeah, the quality very low. And so he was able to take photos on that trip of animals. Like, one specific one that jumps to mind is there was a carandiform banded tree monitor, the Scalaris, that I saw and found, but I couldn't get a photo of it with my camera, but I was able to direct him, okay, there it is, and he got a pretty good picture. It's one of the, if I took that picture now, I'd probably be a little bit disappointed, but it's good, and certainly mine was just like a black schmear, amidst the leaf litter or whatever. So it's not a knock as to his photo, but saying, like, just being honest about it or whatever. But the point would be that he wasn't going when we went in 2019. He wasn't going to go on our Australia trip that year. And I was like, well, as opposed to being in a spot where I'm saying I'm going to defer because someone has definitely better kit, more training, all better ability, all this different stuff. It was like, well, Chris isn't coming. So I better, up my game a little bit so that I'm in a spot where I can do that. And associated with that, I found the Sony RX10 that is basically like the fanciest point and shoot camera that you can get. It has capacity to go like 24 to 600 functional millimeter equivalent, so super zoom to taking something pretty well super close. It's not the same as like a hyper macro. Nipper has, a fancy camera with a hyper macro lens and all this stuff. And yeah, his super close-ups definitely look better than mine, but his doesn't have the capacity to take a picture, an in detail focused, like scale by scale picture of something that's, 25 feet away, in that same way.
Gotcha.
So it's just convenient to be able to carry it around.
Yeah.
It's not that heavy. It's 5 or 6 pounds or whatever. It's probably Chris's stuff. I saw him lugging it around and all this stuff. That didn't seem practical to me. So while I certainly understand the value in, professional photographers and all that stuff, that makes sense, and their quality is the best. This was sort of the best nexus of like ability to take take pictures that you're happy with of things that are either close or far away, in movement, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That's it's kind of an easy button, but that fits well into being carried along when you're on a grueling hike and all of that, and it's not too bad. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm actually curious, what's your opinion on, someone even like me? Not that I mean, I definitely need to go herping more. That's moral of every story. But even for someone who's like likes to take, pictures of their animals in their own collection, do you think it's worth it for, the average person to get like a camera, whether it's for marketing purpose of selling offspring or just, taking good pictures of your animal for social media and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean that's tough. The phone cameras now are so much better. Like, the phone camera
obviously.
that was in my Razor in 2006 or whatever was a joke, literally a joke, right?
Yeah.
But if I think you'll be happy with that investment. Certainly, I have been. With the investment.
I think I want to. Yeah, it's just like it's on a different level. That's the thing. It's like you see these real deal photography pictures and like they just blow, a phone camera out of the water. It's like, yeah, you can catch the occasional good phone photo, but something about those cameras and just everything and the quality, it's just, you really can't beat it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the phone cameras can struggle more with lighting, which in the field herp context becomes a big deal because like all these different headlamps that are throwing off different lights. And then if you have 6 of them going at once that all look, throwing off different wavelengths or whatever. So just the appearance,
Right.
some of them are making it more yellow, some, all this different stuff. I think the phone camera does struggle in that context. They do the best, right? Relative to like a daylight, not blown out daylight photo, and that's then, or in, if they're in your room or whatever, and obviously you have the lights on and that sort of stuff, it's probably you can make a picture you're happy with. It's not necessarily going to blow you away, but you can be happy with it. If you're in those more difficult constraints, like you can tell the difference, right? And it'll be like, we had a conversation on Fight Club about the color of that abyssus, and it's like, well, all of us agree that it was pink, and it's just like, well, your photo doesn't look like that. Yeah, because your headlamp is staring into it and your camera on your phone couldn't adjust to that in the same way that, a regular camera does a little bit better job of. Especially It's got its massive flash and all this stuff that all helps to mediate those outside inputs.
Awesome. Yeah, man, I think I might make that investment. I've been like scared to like look at the prices of cameras. Plus, I don't know jack shit about photography like at all, which obviously I'll do my best to learn, but like I'm scared I'll buy it and not use it the way I want to and then regret the purchase. But I don't know. I'll probably do it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what I would say is that the one that I have now was new like 6 years ago, and I bought it, whatever, 2019. It was already 2 years, so it must be 7, and I bought it 5 years ago or whatever. So, and there's like 4 different variants of it or whatever, and I definitely don't know that much about photography and like how to all these utilizations and all these different. It absolutely can do stuff that I don't know how to use. Absolutely. But you can definitely also just point and shoot it. And what I was going to say is that you probably also could get like a used one or an earlier iteration or whatever for not that bad. And certainly nothing like, people talk about, these professional photographers and their setup is thousands to tens of thousands of dollars or whatever. It's nowhere near that price point and doesn't require that level of sort of knowledge or you're really falling short of it. So.
Okay. Cool, man. All right. Awesome. Yeah. So kind of going into some wrap up questions. What is a reason, I guess, like what keeps you, because, as you've said, you've slimmed down the collection and stuff like that, but what is it that's kept you so focused on a species like the rhinos? Because obviously that's one thing that you've said you've maintained after all this time.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's because to me they're the easiest snake to keep. If you listen to them, like genuinely no problems at all. And they're still compelling. I mean, heck, they have this beautiful horn. They change color over the course of their life. As Schmitty said on a comment above, like if you put them in a display, they'll sit out in display. Generally, like once they're established eating, very minimal problems. And any problems that do happen almost certainly are a reflection of like making one of 2 fundamental errors. So.
Right. All right, cool. And then, seeing where the reptile hobby is today, we've seen so much kind of like negativity over the last few years, especially with the way the economy is now and stuff like that. But what do you think it is that keeps you so motivated with reptiles in general? All the stuff you're doing, all the field herping, even just keeping some of the stuff you do, what keeps you motivated?
Yeah, I just love reptiles, man. There's not
Yeah.
a day goes by that I don't think about reptiles, and honestly, not engaging with so much of that, what can be very negative or can be all the drama focused and all this stuff, um, helps so that it's like literally just I love reptiles, and you think about reptiles, and I want to go see reptiles and find
Yeah.
reptiles, and like that's it. There's no like negative side of like I'm not trying to sell anyone any animals at all. So there's no sales pitch.
Right.
There's no negative interactions associated with that. I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm seeking to avoid and it's a bummer, that I wish there was space or ability to engage with other people more. And that's why I appreciate the offer to come on here, is to talk through some things that maybe I don't get the chance to explain otherwise or whatever. But yeah, outside this context, it's like I'm not engaging with negative content or people posting stuff that's going to get me frustrated and mad and cut away from my love of reptiles, So.
Right. And honestly, what you kind of said is part of why like I finally made the decision. I was like struggling with like, oh, what do I want to keep? What do I want to do? I mean, the ball, what I'm doing with the ball pythons, it's so, it's so much because like I don't know how much you know about that side, but it's always like the constant like you have to keep buying, you have to play keep up forever, and I'm good with doing that for maybe one project, but that's it. Like I'm not and that takes away the love from it. And I've been, especially doing this podcast, I've been really enjoying the colubrids, so I think that's where my heart's at, and so I think that's what I gotta keep more. And it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think there's a ton of wisdom in what you say there.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And what do you think the future looks like for you? Do you foresee anything on the horizon with your collection in the next 3 to 5 years? Any cool herping trips coming up that you think you want to do in the next 3 to 5 years? What's out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, collection's just having less and doing, better with what I have. So
Yeah.
that's it on that end. In terms of herping trips, absolutely. So we got 3 more, this year planned out, and that we're trying to, that are already, essentially we know who's going and where we're going and what we're trying to do and all that. So that's all good. And then, yeah, I guess the list and what remains sort of drives next year. So we'll have to see how we do on these handful of trips. And if we can tick them off then and have a good time, then that's all good. And we just moved to, I got to come Justin's way and try and find a cane break. The New Mexico Ridge Nose will be its own problem, either in Mexico or New Mexico or both. I have to go find a Helleri, an Oreganus, a Northern Pacific rattlesnake, and depending on how. So we had talked about it a bit, I think, on the last show about the on Flip and Tin about the midget faded controversy, and so we'll see where that one fits out. And one more, well, assuming we can find a lepidus this year, then trying to think what's the last one. I can't think of it. But I'd love to see a southern hognose, eastern hognose, all sorts of. Yeah, there's then it just, even if that happens, then it becomes all the Massasaugas, trying to mix one of those in this year, well, maybe 2, and then it just keeps moving on, man. So absolutely, going back to Australia in the fall, so that'll be good. Going back to Kakadu, Darwin, Northern Territory. Hope to strike gold, find another Owen Pelly python, and take better pictures.
Nice.
That'd be good. Maybe not from 40 feet away or whatever. So.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Kind of my last question that I ask everyone, and I'm gonna specify it to rhinos. So like, what would you say to someone who's looking to get into the species? Maybe they've never kept a colubrid before, or they just haven't kept rhinos before in general. What's kind of like your elevator pitch as to why rhino rat snakes? Like, why should they have one?
Well, yeah, the last unicorn that happens, it's functionally, in terms of its demands, is basically like a crested gecko of the snake world, relative to its sort of temperature regime, the flexibility within the parameters we have in our houses, right? So it suits really well to just sort of the temperatures and ambient conditions that people generally like. There are peculiarities to them for sure, in terms of sort of their eggs, the feeding, that exposure to constant wetness and what that can do, those sorts of things. But they're definitely weird snakes for sure, but they're not all in ways, none of which are inconvenient relative to keeping a snake in a box in your apartment, right? And they don't get huge. There's, in general, right, on a adult female, you're talking about 3 feet, more or less. A male at 10 or 15 years old could be 4.5, 5.5 feet, but that same sort of, we're talking on a properly formed one, an inch in diameter, 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches on one of those really big males. So they're super easy to accommodate. Generally speaking, they don't bite, when as babies, right, they're a little pain to get started. But after that, then the worry is just, if they come for fingers or whatever, but a simple, either a glove or a hook or whatever, and say, hey, we're not doing that right now. In general, they're totally docile. So they're the, could be, if they were easier to produce and produce lots of them, like in terms of just the elevator pitch of the crested gecko, hey, just keep it in your room with no heat and just a little light bulb on it, and it'll go through the natural seasonality that you experience in your own conditions and whatever. It'll do great.
Awesome, man. Well, it was a fantastic episode. We probably had there was people rotating in and out. Let's check out. Let's see. We had 10 likes on here. There was probably 15 to 20 people, because some people don't hit the like button, but it's all right. I appreciate you coming on. What do you have to say to everyone who watched tonight or may watch at a later time or listen?
Just thanks. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Happy to talk with you, and maybe consider a rhino.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely need one. All right, man. Well, thank you so much again. I'm going to throw you in the backstage. I'll run through the outro and we'll talk for a couple minutes after if you want to hang.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. Thanks, man. Guys, what another great episode of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. I hope you all enjoyed. Rob is just super knowledgeable, and every time I listen to him, I think I definitely learned something. And it was great to have him on here, because the two kind of species we highlighted on the rhinos and the Porphyracia are two of my favorites. So it was really great to talk about that stuff, and I hope you guys all enjoyed that. If you did, make sure you hit a like on today's video. Also, I forgot to say it while he was here again, but second link goes to his Instagram. Go give Rob a follow. Check out what he's herping up, all his photography and stuff like that. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Getting close to 1K on YouTube, so that'll be awesome. Again, follow me on social media, all of that stuff down below. You can give me a follow on Instagram. You'll stay up to date with what's going on with the pod, what's going on with my collection and stuff like that. And otherwise, you can also subscribe to the Meteoric Serpents Patreon. That's in the description below. Whether you want to support me or, get a little bit behind the scenes of what goes on here and the podcasts, that's awesome. And we could build a great Discord community. I already got a little chat going with my couple members. It's awesome. But yeah, guys, hope you all enjoyed. This was episode number 30 of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast with Rob Stone. Hope you all enjoyed. Have a great night, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.